What's up everybody, and thank you for joining me for another video. My name is Whack4863, but you can call me Whack. Today I want to look at daggers, and the daggers that I'm going to compare today are the Darkslayer daggers, Rex Chimera's daggers, the Liquarius Wicked Thorns, and then the Kawazon daggers. This test does exclude Mezenrock's daggers and then the Tebent daggers as well, mainly because I don't have either one of them, but we'll get into a couple of things that I feel like you might want to look at if you have specific builds. Tebent daggers could also be considered tier 2 weapons, but bottom line, I just don't have them, so I wasn't able to test them. Now, I had a whole bunch of different tests that I had planned out, like going and hitting the practice dummy until I burned through all 1 million of its health with each one of the daggers, and then taking it and fighting against bosses or doing the Gate of Infinity, and all of that's great, but at the end of the day, I think I figured out a much easier way to test this. But let's get into comparing the daggers, and then interestingly enough, depending on the build that you are going for or that you have, you may want to look for a different set of daggers. I know that the fan favorite happens to be the Liquarius's Wicked Thorns, and we'll get into why that is, but certain builds actually don't benefit from those daggers. My build is Dagger Greatsword, so Liquarius's Wicked Thorns works well with my build. So the first thing I had to do was figure out where my stat points needed to be in order to make this the best possible test I could. So I equipped each one of these different daggers without spending any stat points to see what the highest number from each one was. I then went through and distributed my points so that they would all match during these tests. 50 strength, 50 dexterity, 30 wisdom, and 50 perception is where I landed. That does leave some points that are not spent, but that's just extra damage that I would be doing. I really wanted to get a baseline for all of these weapons. So testing this turns out to be super simple. I'm simply going to attack the Sand Basilisk the exact same way with each and every dagger and then record the numbers. These two attacks this way should prompt the highest amount of damage I can get each and every time. So let's start off with the Darkslayer daggers, and what I'm going to do is use Shadow Strike, Ascending Slash, and then Guillotine Blade. And the Guillotine Blade hit for 33,000. And then for the second test, we're going to use Devastating Smash, Ascending Slash, and then Guillotine Blade. And again, the Guillotine Blade hit for 33,000. I am ignoring the heavy attacks during this test. Now for the Rex daggers with Shadow Strike, the Guillotine Blade hits for 33,000. And the Devastating Smash with the Rex Blade hits for 25,000. Now with the Kawazon Twilight daggers, Shadow Strike hits for 25,000. However, the Kawazon daggers with Devastating Smash hit for 33,000. Now for everyone's favorite, we have Liquarius's Wicked Thorns hitting for 35,000 with Shadow Strike. With Devastating Smash, it hit for 25,000. So the highest damage with Shadow Strike goes to Liquarius's Wicked Thorns with 35k damage. And then the highest damage with Devastating Smash, it goes to the Darkslayer daggers with 33,672. Now, 33,000 and some change was the baseline for all of the daggers except for Liquarius when using Devastating Smash, and there's a good reason for that. If we take a look at the info for these daggers, you can see it says base damage is increased by 25 for 3 seconds upon using dagger mobility skills. So using a mobility skill from the Greatsword does not increase that base damage. But that increased 25 base damage is the reason why we were able to get a 35,000 hit when we use Shadow Strike on the Sand Basilisk. So if you're using the Liquarius's Wicked Thorns, you need to use a mobility skill prior to using your highest damage skill. That is going to proc the 25 additional base damage, which is then multiplied by all of the damage that comes from that skill. So let's look at what mobility skills are actually available with daggers. First and foremost, we have Shadowed Strike. Pretty easy to tell that's a mobility skill. We then also have Frenzied Sword Dash, although I don't know that many people actually use this skill. Block Blade is actually also listed as a mobility skill. And then the one that you may not know about is actually listed as an attack. Cleaving Moonlight is actually considered a mobility skill because it moves your character in the direction of the enemy. So if you're using Laquarius's Wicked Thorns, you want to make sure that you are using one of those mobility skills prior to using your skill that's doing the most damage. So there's definitely an upside to using Laquarius's Wicked Thorns if you are using the mobility skills in order to get that additional damage. However, if you happen to be a ranged character like a staff dagger, Laquarius may not be the right fit for you. Simply put, if you're not using those mobility skills in your rotation, you're leaving something else on the table. Darkslayer daggers will allow you to get an additional 11 strength and 1525 health. You can also unlock additional health as a trait on these daggers. So these daggers would definitely be good with like an Adentis Greatsword, or if you're just looking to have more beefy health. Rex Chimera daggers have the highest amount of dexterity that you can get from any dagger. If you're looking for an absolutely fast-paced build, the Rex Chimera's Fangs with the Duke Magna's Fury Warblade is an absolute blender of a build. And then if you're someone that wants to stand at range and not be up in the fight, I would recommend Kawazan's Twilight Daggers for the additional critical hit chance increases of 125 during the day and 250 at night. But again, and I can't stress this enough, that's only if you're not using the mobility skills from daggers. Now we still need to test the Kawazan daggers at night because we get that additional 250 critical hit chance. Now this is a test with the stats exactly the same. Just so you know, the Sand Basilisks do take additional damage at night. So with the Shadow Strike combo, we are going to hit for a huge 38,000 damage. And then for the Devastating Smash, you can see we come in with another 38,000 damage. Going a little bit further with this test, I'm going to show you each dagger with the exact setup that I would run them with, so the total amount of stat points spent for each and every dagger, and they all come in a little bit differently. So at night, Kawazan daggers with the Shadow Strike comes in at 39,000 damage, almost 40k. And then with the Devastating Smash, we're gonna end up right about the same place with another 39,000 damage. And the important thing about the Kawazan daggers is just the additional critical hit chance. With the Darkslayer daggers, it took me a ton of time to actually get a critical hit to proc. I kept doing this over and over, getting the lower end of the numbers to actually come up. But when I finally hit the critical hit, it was absolutely amazing, coming in at over 40k with that dagger. So you can see 40,255 right there, and then with Devastating Smash, we have another 40,266. But the inconsistency of not hitting those critical attacks on a regular basis with these daggers makes it so that I only want to recommend them if you need the help. Rex's daggers were also pretty inconsistent on hitting the criticals, even though I was able to get all the way up to 70 dexterity with this setup. But when we did finally hit the criticals, we came in with 31,000 with Shadow Strike, and then a whopping 40,000 with the Devastating Smash. Laquarius actually presented its own set of problems as well, whether it was not getting the critical hits or actually killing the enemies before I got to use the Guillotine Blade. And the only reason why I was able to kill the Sand Basilisks without the Guillotine Blade attack with the Laquarius Wicked Thorns is because that 25 base damage applies to all damage dealt within that 3 seconds. So it doesn't matter whether it's a critical hit or not, you are applying an additional 25 damage before all the other multipliers of those skills with Laquarius's Wicked Thorns. And as a pro tip, that pairs really well with Umbral Spirit. But getting to some actual numbers here, when it did crit, with Devastating Smash it did 40,081. And then with Shadow Strike, it did 42,500. Now, even though Laquarius's Gale Blade, the stat that's on the daggers, says it only lasts for 3 seconds, it is actually increased by your buff duration. So every time I use a mobility skill, I actually get just about 5 seconds of that buff to have those attacks deal an additional 25 damage. And honestly, since I use Junobot's Warblade, I'm probably going to continue to use the Kawazan daggers for some time and see how I really feel about whether I'm getting more critical hits with it than I am with the Laquarius's Wicked Thorns. The reason why is that Junobot's blade has a very low base damage at the lowest and a very high base damage at the highest. So the more critical hits that I can get, the more DPS I'll be putting out. But don't take that as a recommendation to switch over to the Kawazan daggers. My suggestion is, if you're doing a dagger build where you're using those mobility skills on a regular basis, absolutely 100% stick with the Laquarius's Wicked Thorns. If you are not using those mobility skills, you can supplement any other dagger so that you're getting the bonuses that you're looking for, whether that be max health, whether that be dexterity, or whether that is the additional critical hit chance from the Kawazan daggers. I'd like to thank all my YouTube members for your continued support. Y'all are absolute legends. Don't forget to whack the like button if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more content. And if you don't want to be out of whack, there's another video on the screen right now that you can click to support more of my content.